Hello everyone and welcome to this video. Now today I'm going to be doing another one of my album ranking videos where I take a look at all of the albums that I own from a particular year. So over the past couple of weeks I've been really indulging myself in 1982. So I own 35 albums what came out that year, and I've put them all into a list. There are some controversial choices like in this list, I will say that right from the start. So please don't be too harsh on me in the comments, but I am aware that there will probably be a couple of albums towards the lower end of my list that I think for a lot of other people would be some of the albums off the year. But I will just get cracking with the list. I mean, some of these records I've had for years and barely played, so it was quite good to sort of revisit some of these as well. So yeah, we'll just get started with the list. At number 35, my least favourite album, out of the ones I own, is Pete Townshend's All the Best Cowboys Have Chinese Eyes. Now, the reason why this one is in last place is because it is such a bland album. There's some, I guess, attempts at writing socially conscious songs on here, which just really don't work for me. I think they come across as quite ham-fisted and just a little bit they just don't work at all. And then the rest of it is just incredibly forgettable. So Pete Townshend at number 35. And then I feel like I'd be really harsh on Pete Townshend by putting this album just above it at 34, but it's The Who's album It's Hard from 82. So this was The Who's last album of their original run, and you can tell, I think, that they were getting a bit fed up of being The Who, and so basically it's a very dull, boring album. This much like the Townsend album from the same year. Very much on autopilot, sort of retreading old ground and making a very forgettable collection of songs. There's very little on here what is worth returning to. The opening track, Athena, is quite catchy, but more so in an annoying way than anything. It's not a great song, and I quite liked the guitar work on the title track, but aside from that, there was very little of merit on this album. So it's at number 34. Okay, number 33 now. We're going for an ex-Beatle, which is George Harrison's 1982 album Gone Troppo. So very much by this point, I think George Harrison had given up caring basically about music, about the music industry, in general. Really, I think this was a contractual obligation sort of album, and it's basically a very messy collection of songs. I'd say the first two tracks I do quite like, and it sets the album up quite nice. I do like Wake Up My Love. I mean, it's got some synths on it, but I mean, you'll see later on in this video, there's nothing wrong with a bit of synthesizer work in my book. And then you've got That's the Way It Goes, which is a really solid track, but then the album just goes off the rails after that, getting things like I Really Love You, this doo-wop sort of pache song, and then Grease is just a slide guitar piece that does nothing, and then on side 2 there's very little worth returning to either. Another slightly poor album there by George Harrison. Another album up, which is one which I bought many years ago and never really gave a lot of time to. So again, this was a good opportunity to revisit it, but it's Alan Parsons' project, Eye in the Sky. So Alan Parsons, famed recording engineer. I think he'd worked on Beatles records and had engineered Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. I mean, so he's a very accomplished engineer, and this was his sort of way in, I guess, into making his own albums. And it's essentially the style of this is sophisticated soft rock, very slick album. I mean, I really like the first track, the title track, Eye in the Sky. I thought was really good, very McCartney-esque melody, and a bit Todd Rundgren-y in places, as well, quite very musically precise sort of thing. But then for me, there's just a couple of pretty bad songs, things like Gemini I'm not a fan of, Silence and I is 7 minutes and it just goes on for far too long, far too overblown. And I think as well on this album, because it's not Alan Parsons singing it, is various singers, they all just feel like session people singing on someone else's song, which is essentially what it is. So there's no real passion in the vocals at any point, and all the songs just feel quite disparate and devoid of any character really. Eye in the Sky there at number 32. Another one now, which I think a lot of people would probably have a little bit higher on their list. And I am a fan of this artist, like more generally. It's Boy 3, so of course, like the late great Teddy Hall, their first album. They made 2 albums. This is the first one, just self-titled, the Fun Boy 3. It's a pop album, this, but quite disturbing one. There's a lot of slightly odd sounds and that going on, like on here, and then it's all over the place. You know, you've got some kind of slightly more kind of sort of African tinge sort of songs, but then you've got things like It Ain't What You Do, It's The Way That You Do It, featuring like Bananarama, this very catchy, infectious kind of song, but also very like annoying like as well. And then there's a couple of tracks which I just like I've got noted here that I just didn't like, Faith and the song Hope and Charity I've got noted down that I didn't like either. So patchy album here for me anyway. Okay, next up now, number 30. Again, I think this one, general consensus is that this is I think the band's worst album. It's Blondie's last album off their original run, The Hunter here. So a strange and messy album. Again, it lacks any of the distinctiveness of their earlier releases, and even like their last album, like Auto American, was something different from Blondie, but this one here just I don't know, it just doesn't do anything for me really. I've got noted down here that Dance Away was my favourite track. Reminded me of kind of the quite a bouncy song, could have fitted on either of their first 2 albums, but it is a rather sorry end to the first kind of incarnation of Blondie. Okay, now this is the one I think which is going to cause a fair bit of uproar. But at number 29, I've got Prince and 1999. Now, I hear you gasp. So, for me, I think I just have to reconcile myself that I'm not going to become a fan of Prince. And it's not for not thinking that he's talented, because he is. Very talented musician, producer, kind of record maker. But I just don't think his songs are good for me personally. It's kind of, I do really like the title track, I would say, and Little Red Corvette is great. But then I just think that a lot of the other tracks are just far too long for me. A lot of the lyrical content is, it's got quite risque kind of like lyrics. Just doesn't quite work for me. Very, very much kind of party album kind of thing with kind of party lyrics to kind of like go like along with it. It's really not like my usual like bag sort of thing. But I've got noted here that there is a good track towards the end called Free. I think it was a good soulful ballad, but the rest of it, there's a lot of stuff in here that for me anyway, like, it's not really like my cup of tea. But like I said, like, I'm aware that there'll be a lot of people who this is the album of the year. Okay, next up now, number 28. I am going for a record which I got from my uncle's collection, but I've never really given too much attention to, like, until now. So it was Ultravox and the album Quartet here. So this was something like their 5th or 6th album. They went through a few like incarnations like Ultravox, but this one was produced by George Martin of all people, which is a bit of a rogue choice like at the time, because George Martin was, the Beatles were not like, I suppose this was just after John Lennon like had been killed, wasn't it? So there was maybe a bit more goodwill towards the Beatles like around this sort of time. But certainly George Martin, like, as a producer, I don't think had produced anything like of significance really since the Beatles, to be honest. So when he got the call to kind of work with like Ultravox, I think he was himself quite taken aback. But he doesn't really make his mark on this album at all. It's quite difficult to tell that this is a George Martin production, because it just feels like a very smooth, generic, contemporary 80s sort of pop album, really. There's a lot of tracks there that just go on and on and on for me. Things like Serenade, I don't particularly like, but there's one I did quite like on the end side, one I've got noted down, Him. So again, patchy album here. And just slightly kind of generic production sort of like lets it down for me. Okay, now I think we're kind of going up a rung here to albums that I actually would say I generally do quite like now, sort of like records which I would think, I'll listen to that. That's a good record. I could probably, it's one of these I could probably purge those ones from my collection, but maybe aside from like the George Harrison one, possibly, just because I'm like big Beatles collector like that. But I think beyond this point, I would say I generally like all these albums. If you just think I was being kind of too negative, like up to like this point. So number 27, we've got Depeche Mode here, and the album A Broken Flame, a Broken Frame. So this one is their second album, and it's a bit of a transitional album for them. The debut was very poppy, very bright, things I Just Can't Get Enough, New Life, those kind of sort of like, very synth pop sort of driven songs. But this is a record where you can kind of tell they're moving away from that like a little bit. There's kind of songs which kind of hint at the slightly darker and slightly more like industrial kind of nature, like off like their later releases. There's a couple of great highlights on here. Leaving Silence is a great song, and See You is again a nice throwback to that early kind of pop sound. A couple of tracks I'm not as keen on, but generally a good record here though from Depeche Mode. Okay, next up now at number 26, I have got Peter Gabriel's fourth album, his fourth self-titled album, but more commonly these days referred to as Security. So this one is, well, I guess the follow-up to one of my favourite albums from 1980, like his third album. This one sees Gabriel leaning a lot more into the kind of world music sort of stuff, and again a bit like the last album, very drum heavy, but this one again I guess taking like that kind of, whereas Peter Gabriel 3 Melt was more post-punk kind of feel, this one is definitely a lot more rhythmic and that world music sort of vibe like coming through. There's a couple of like really good tracks. I really like the song like I Have the Touch. Not a big fan of like Shock the Monkey, which was the single, I think the most popular song. That song kind of gets on my nerves a little bit. But then there's another good track on side 2 called Wallflower, which again I think is a slower, more dramatic piece that works really, really, really well. So yeah, Pete Gabriel's Security, number 26. Okay, next up now at number 25 is an album that I thought I would have had a lot higher, like on like the list, like, to be fair, honest with you. But just kind of listen to it again. I'm kind of just thinking again, maybe this band is maybe not quite for me. It's the Dream Syndicate, and it's the album The Days of Wine and Roses. So on paper, these guys should be right up my street. They're part of that kind of Paisley underground scene, so where a lot of bands in the early 80s, on kind of like American bands predominantly, were sort of revisiting kind of 60s sort of sounds, like and vibes, very birdsy kind of garage rock sort of feel to them. But certainly the Dream Syndicate were definitely at the more artsier kind of post-punk abrasive end of that kind of sort of like the Paisley underground scene sort of thing. So I think it's a decent record. I think it's a very consistent album. There's no real bad songs on here, but there's just nothing really on here that really stands out and speaks to me either. I think the main problem is the vocals. They just sound very nondescript, quite dispassionate, kind of spoken kind of thing, and not really changing throughout the album. So it definitely kind of, all the songs kind of just sort of blur into one, like on like this one for me, like a little bit. So yeah, it's at number 25 anyway for me, The Days of Wine and Roses. Okay, that's not now for me. At number 24, we've got one of the best-selling acts of the 1980s. We've got Dire Straits. For me, love over gold here. So this was one of the first Dire Straits albums that I probably heard and kind of got into. I think my dad had it on CD, and there's some really great stuff in it. Telegraph Road is the whole of the first side. It's like 14 minutes. Actually, no, wait, it's not actually. A Private Investigation is also on side 1. So 40-minute track, and it's great. It's an epic song, really, really good stuff. But then Private Investigations I've never liked. I think it's just quite boring. It doesn't go anywhere. Again, that's 7 minutes, and it doesn't need to be that long. And side 2's quite good. I do really like the title track. So again, there's some good stuff on here. It's not the most exciting album like in the world, but it's well produced, sophisticated rock, I think it is a very solid album. Okay, next up now, number 23, we've got again one which I think some people would probably have a lot higher. One of, again, the most well-loved artists of the 80s, Kate Bush and The Dreaming here. So this was Kate's, I think it was the 4th or 5th album, and it was her most experimental to date, basically. A very interesting and slightly difficult album, like at times. Features Bush using a lot more synthesizers and kind of brooding drum sounds. I think this was the first record she recorded entirely by herself as well. So very much kind of leading up into that kind of like the Hounds of Love kind of self-produced kind of thing. But whereas on Hounds of Love, she kind of tailored it to a more commercial kind of audience and kind of get that perfect balance of experimentation but also commercialism. I think on this one, it is just a little bit too experimental for like its own good. There's lots of different vocal processing and sound effects going on, as I said, I can't say I like everything like on this album by any means, but I do respect this album like for kind of like her kind of like sort of really spreading her wings and kind of blossoming into like one of like sort of like the era's like most defining like artists, but it is an album I do really have to be in the mood to appreciate. Okay, next up, number 22, we've got Sweets from a Stranger by Squeeze. So this was, again, another kind of final album like for that band. Again, a lot of these kind of new wave sort of acts, Squeeze, Blondie, kind of coming to the end, sort of wrapping things up like by 1982. So this was the last album of the kind of like initial run like of Squeeze albums. And it's an album which I just don't think it quite knows what it wants to be. It's got some very contemporary and somewhat experimental sounds on it, but then also shows the band kind of leaning more into a kind of adult sort of contemporary sounds I call it here like as well. I think it just sort of so despite them kind of being all over the place stylistically, it also sounds a bit boring like as well, and they sound a bit fed up like on this album too. So Squeeze would basically they would formally disband. Difford and Tilbrook would make an album which would be a massive flop, and then Squeeze would get back together like only I think like 3 years after, so it's kind of pretty pointless kind of like breaking up. So sort of final album of that original run, and I'd say maybe not the weakest but certainly sort of down there, like in like sort of like think like the top 5 like it would be like off like that original run of albums. Okay, next one now, number 21, is an album that, certainly since I first heard it, has really, really, really grown on me. It is a more recent pick. I think I only got it like earlier this year or maybe last year. But it's Altered Images, the album Pinky Blue. So Altered Images, great kind of, Scottish kind of like band like from like the time. But this album like is a very quirky kind of pop album. Claire Grogan's vocals, very recognisable, very unique kind of voice, which has a real it's kind of aged quite well, I would say, because it kind of got a touch of kind of dream pop, kind of shoegaze kind of feel to it, which would kind of come like a lot later kind of thing, certainly like in like the vocals. And as I said, I do specifically remember not liking this album like when I first heard it, but certainly revisiting it for this video, I actually really, really liked it. There's a couple of great highlights, things like See Those Eyes, Little Brown Head, and See You Later, like I would pick out, and then I really like the last track, like I said, like as I said, like Good Night and I Wish, I would pick out as kind of proto dream pop kind of thing. But there are a few missteps on this album. There's a cover of Neil Diamond's song Blue, which you don't really need, doesn't really work. And also the thing what probably bugs me most about this album is the inclusion of a club sort of mix, a 12-inch mix of I Could Be Happy. I mean, Altered Image is one of their very best songs, and they choose to put on this kind of remix, which just absolutely sort of tears like the song to shreds kind of thing, and just doesn't work like in the context like of like the album. So no, a really good record here for the most part. Altered Images and Pinky Blue. Okay, sticking with Scotland now, at number 20, we have got Orange Juice here. So this is Rip It Up, the first of 2 Orange Juice albums I'll be showing in this video. And this is a really interesting record. Like on the one hand, this was Orange Juice's kind of sort of attempt at making like a mainstream kind of album, and it was in the sense of like it was a lot more professional sounding, sort of professionally recorded compared to their messy but charming debut. But by this point, they'd also completely overhauled like their lineup. So I think it was only Edwyn Collins and maybe one other member like who survived like from like the first album, and they kind of with that almost overhauled their complete sound like as well. So therefore it's a kind of slightly messy mix of kind of Collins kind of crooning ballads, sort of conventional like indie pop, like i.e. like the single like Rip It Up and Start Again, and then some slightly more rhythmic material and kind of sort of tribal sounding stuff coming from like their new drummer ZK Manika. So quite an eclectic listen this one here, and it's an album which is a bit confusing at first, a bit messy at first, but I think once you get into it, there is some real good solid highlights on here. So it would be my number 20. Next up now at number 19, we've got a debut album here by Talk Talks. This is The Party's Over. So this is a great debut. It would see Mark Hollis and co like on a path of discovery and kind of pushing musical boundaries like as like the decade went on. This is arguably though their safest and most commercial kind of album, with its bright synth pop arrangements and kind of sort of but kind of vocals and lyrics which sort of present a slightly darker side, kind of lurking like under the surface, like of Talk, which would kind of come to the fore like on like later albums. For me, it's the singles, things like Talk, It's So Serious, Today, and which are the highlights, as well as I think there was a good track I quite liked on side 2 called Candy. Yeah, like I've got noted here hints at kind of their kind of future album. So all round, I think a really solid debut album. Okay, that's not now at number 18. Now, again, I wasn't quite sure where to put this one, but it's kind of gone mid-table here for me, which is Marshall Crenshaw. Again, another debut album here, self-titled debut. This is quite an easygoing album, very kind of solid kind of rockabilly style, sort of rock and roll kind of throwback sort of feel to it, very Buddy Holly kind of like influence, like I'd say, conveying that kind of a bit of that kind of back to basics sort of songwriting, like the song being key kind of thing, like that had been sort of pioneered by like Elvis Costello and Squeeze like a few years kind of earlier. So it maybe feels a little bit like it's outdated even by like the time like it had like came out, because I mean, these acts we've already seen Squeeze, they were already kind of past at their peak like by this point. I mean, the lyrics of this are quite good, or like alright, they may be a bit basic, I'd say, devoid of like a lot of meaning, and the production is quite clean, maybe like overtly so, but it is a consistent good album, some real good songs on here, like maybe guilty pleasure songs, but songs which I just generally like on here. I think it's quite a charming album overall. So yeah, Marshall Crenshaw at number 18. Okay, next up now at number 17, we've got another record again from my uncle's collection, which I'd never really paid too much attention to until now. And I'm quite glad, like I'm doing this video sort of highlighting albums like this to me, which is Simple Minds, the album New Gold Dream. And for some reason it's I always used to think this as a compilation album, like when like I first came across it, like 82, 83 and 84, like it's kind of subtitled there, but it is a studio album and it was their breakthrough commercial success, like for Simple Minds. There's a few tracks which actually kind of listening to it for the first time and think, I know that one. So those were Promise You a Miracle, which I must say is probably my least favourite like on the album. I actually think is a bit annoying. The way it just comes in straight away like with the chorus, it just comes around too many times and doesn't do a lot for me. And then Glittering Prize as well, which I actually really like. I think that is a great song. And there's a couple of other great tracks. I really like the opening one, like Somewhere Someone in the Summertime, like is a great track. And then there's another great one called like Somebody Up There Likes Me, I think, like I really quite liked as well. So yeah, it's one that has really grown on me, like since like I first gave it like a proper listen for this video. It just kind of kept creeping up and up the list. Okay, next up now, number 16. Again, possibly one that I think some people would have a lot higher, but for me, this is where it's fallen. It's The Cure and Pornography. So this is a very dark album, like as you can possibly tell like by like the cover, probably The Cure's most dark album, like I would say. It's very intense album, very drum heavy, and just has such a gloomy kind of atmosphere, like kind of like permeating through this album. There's a few memorable tracks on here, things like I think like The Hanging Garden was issued as a single, not to much success, and another track called A Strange Day, like on side 2, I've got noted down as being another favourite. But again, this is a record where I really need to be like in the mood for it. It's not one I can just shove on at any time, like and have a good time with. You really need to be kind of prepared for this album. So yeah, number 16 is where it falls. Okay, now number 15, another fairly recent pickup here again, I think from earlier this year. It's Blancmange and Happy Families. So again, I think this is another debut album we've got here, and this is a good kind of synth pop kind of record. Vocally reminds me a bit of Talking Heads and David Byrne, but that kind of transposed into the format of very catchy, very commercial, sounding like tracks. Like Living on the Ceiling is one of the great tracks off the 1980s, and another track called Waves, I think on side 2, has got a really sort of moody, kind of transcendent like atmosphere to it. So yeah, a great record here from Blancmange at number 15. Okay, number 14 now, we've got a record here by a band who I'm still fairly new to, Psychedelic first, still just kind of dabbling in them, like I've got a few albums, but yeah, I can't really say that they are a massive favourite of mine yet. But this is an interesting record. It's called Forever Now. I think it was their third album, I want to say, and it's a very interesting record. It's produced by Todd Rundgren, like, of all people, so it's much more smoother, more kind of slick affair compared to their earlier, slightly more rowdy efforts. But and then you've got some quite interesting arrangement choices going on here. There's different uses of different cellos and kind of like sort of string arrangements, and you've got I think there's like a marimba like on like the first track like as well. So it's a consistently good album, I would say. There's very few bad tracks on here, but also again nothing that is really standing out. But it's one that I think maybe do need to give like a bit more attention to, because I really enjoyed it whenever I played it. Okay, that's on that number 13. We have got Joe Jackson and the album Night and Day. So this is a quite sophisticated album. It's a bit of a sidestep for Joe, who had, I think he'd done, last time was Jumping Jive, wasn't it? So that was a kind of sidestep, and then this was a kind of another sidestep, kind of almost this kind of not quite synth pop. I guess Stepping Out is the only real kind of track where you could say it is a kind of very 80s kind of synth sort of driven track. You've got a drum machine kind of like all over that track, but then you've got like just some great songwriting, things like Breaking Us in Two like is a kind of great ballad, and Real Men is a very powerful song. There's a few tracks in there which I'm not massive on. Things like Chinatown I think is a bit annoying, and Cancer as well, again another track which just doesn't do a whole lot for me. So this one is an inconsistent record. It's kind of the opposite of like the last one there. There's some absolute gems, but then a couple of lesser tracks as well for me. Okay, that's up now at number 12. We've got Fleetwood Mac and Mirage. So I'd say this is the kind of forgotten Fleetwood Mac album, like in like a lot of ways, because you've got, of course, Rumours, then you've got Tusk, this kind of sprawling like experimental album, and then you've got Tango in the Night that came after, which is their big kind of commercial kind of album. So many hits like on that one. But this is the album which often gets kind of completely like overlooked, but I think it's really solid actually. I mean, it is a kind of return to that kind of radio-friendly pop in the kind of mostly kind of taken forward by kind of Christine McVie. So in songs like Love in Store and Hold Me are kind of sort of throwbacks to that. You've got kind of Stevie Nicks doing her usual kind of witchy, mysterious songs and kind of sort of ballads, things like Gypsy, and then some old school kind of like rockabilly like influences, particularly like on like the Buckingham tracks. Things like Can't Go Back and Oh Diane, which was a pretty big hit for them like in like the UK. I think it was their highest charting single here possibly, which is strange because it's not one of their best songs. And then like beyond the singles, I mean, you've got some really underrated tracks like The Book of Love, I think has got some great harmony vocals on it, and then Stevie Nicks' song That's Alright is great as well. So all round a really solid Fleetwood Mac album here. Mirage at number 12. Okay, now just missing out on a place in the top 10, we have got Tom Petty and Long After Dark, or Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, of course. So this is a record which I think was a bit difficult for them to make. I think it went through a few different track list like iterations. It was the last one that he'd work with Jimmy Iovine exclusively on, and I think that relationship had almost run its course a little bit, because it is a bit kind of samey, sort of samey kind of sound, certainly when sort of compared to things like Hard Promises, like the album like before it. But I think this album has some real gems on it. There's things like the single like You Got Lucky. One Story Tonic is a great rocker, just sort of very immediate kind of song. And then maybe my favourite on here is Deliver Me. I think is an absolute Tom Petty classic. Should have been a single, should be on all his best of compilations, because it's absolutely one of my favourites. There's a couple of filler songs, things like Straight Into Darkness, and maybe Between Two Worlds. Just again, it's hard to kind of remember what that song goes like, but it was definitely like a good record here for Petty. And I think also it's the first album where he's got Howie Epstein, who had recently joined like on bass, and he did a lot of harmony vocals with Tom Petty, which is another kind of layer like which I think they were just exploring like on this album, but would become a vital component of the next couple of Heartbreakers albums. So Tom Tom Petty just missing out on a place in the top 10. Next up now, number 10. So yeah, we've got Haircut 100 here and Pelican West. So yeah, slightly surprised that I had this one so high, but I just I just really enjoyed this album. It's quite clean cut pop, like off like the time that you could say. Reminds me of a slightly less edgy, like Orange Juice possibly. I mean, a touch more brass like on this one here. But I mean, Nick Haywood, very young at like the time, but a very talented songwriter. Like at this point, it's got a kind of it's got like the great pop songs, but they've got an air of kind of jazzy kind of sophistication to some of like the arrangements like as well. And it's an album which I don't think has dated much either, because I don't sniff a synthesizer like on here like anywhere, yeah, it really kind of stands out sort of, certainly when compared to a lot of other albums like off like the year. You've got some of like the year's best singles, things like Favourites, Shirts, Boy Meets Girl, Love Plus One, and then you've got some other great album tracks like on here as well, such as Snow Girl and Marine Boy I picked out as well. So yeah, no, all round really good record here. Okay, next one now, number 9, we have got Felt here. So this is Crumbling the Antiseptic Beauty. So this one is a debut album. Yeah, a very primitive record this. But a real sense of beauty and charm to it. Quite, it often gets referred to as jangle pop, but it's not pop. It's just kind of, yeah, it's got this kind of shimmering kind of quality to it, which I think like really works. It's quite a short record. It's about, yeah, there's only 6 tracks on here. It's about half an hour like in length. But it doesn't really need to be like any longer. I think it just does what it sets out to do and just does it really well. Brooding drums on it, so there's some tracks which are a bit more Velvet Undergroundy, but then just some tracks which just have some great guitar work on them, and then kind of, yeah, very echoey kind of sort of like ethereal vocals from Lawrence like on it as well. So no, yeah, Felt at number 9. Okay, another one now, which again is you would put in the pile of kind of inconsistent albums. This one probably more so than many others. So it's The Jam and The Gift at number 8. So yeah, the reason why it is this high is because I think it's got some of The Jam's very best songs. So Happy Together, great opener. Ghosts, one of Weller's most tender, most beautiful ballads. Just Two is a 5 o'clock hero, great lyric. Running on the Spot, great. Carnation, fantastic. And of course Town Called Malachite as well. But then there's a couple of duds on this album as well. So Transglobal Express is not great. Circus is a fillery instrumental, and The Gift, the closing track, is okay, but it's not one of the Jam's finest moments like either. But I would say with this record, the good stuff kind of more than makes up for those 1 or 2 slightly dud tracks. Okay, next up now, another debut album at number 7 on my list. Again, one I'm slightly surprised I had this high. It's a China Crisis, and definitely the longest album title we've got here. Difficult Shapes and Passive Rhythms. Some people think it's fun to entertain is the full name like off the album. But this is a great debut. Quite moody and atmospheric, but very synth pop. Like as well, like at the same time, doesn't take itself too seriously either, you know, which I guess a lot of synth pop bands sometimes did, you know. They maybe thought they were kind of more important than they were possibly, but China Crisis are just having fun like on this album, and you've got some great songs. Seven Sports for All is great, Christian is fantastic, Red Sails I love, yeah, there's just a lot of great stuff on here. So number 7, China Crisis. Okay, that's not now number 6. Now this one again was one which I was kind of struggling with a little bit. We should have put it like in like the top 5, should have not. Well, number 6 is where it's fallen. So Billy Joel and the Nylon Curtain. Now this is my favourite Billy Joel album. Not a massive fan of his, but this is a great record. And it's essentially, I would say, his Beatles tribute album. You know, kind of John Lennon had died in 1980, and this one basically kind of is kind of Billy's kind of homage to sort of like the Beatles basically. So you've got things like Laura, which is this kind of I Am the Walrus kind of sort of feel to it. Things like Scandinavian Skies has this kind of Strawberry Fields Forever kind of cello work kind of going on. But he's kind of teamed these kind of arrangements with kind of quite contemporary lyrics as well. So there's things like Allentown talking about the kind of decline like of like industrial like America. Goodnight Saigon is this kind of like anti-war kind of song, you know, kind of sort of like leading like into like the Vietnam War sort of thing. And then Pressure as well, of course, another song, about the kind of like the pressures like off work, and then I think Scandinavian Sky's kind of touching on like the Cold War like off like the time. So no, a great record here, and definitely my favourite Billy Joel album. And number 6 is where it falls. Okay, now at number 5, so big top 5 time. We've got number 5 kicking that off with Orange Juice, You Can't Hide Your Love Forever. So this was their debut album, first of 2 records they released in 1982, and this is an innocent, you could say messy, but also just very charming, very fun album. So many catchy songs on here. It's humorous, it's self-deprecating, but and as I said, it's not taking itself too seriously. They're having fun and playing really well. There's some great guitar interplay work on here. Things like the tracks like Tender Object, Falling and Laughing is one of the great kind of like sort of gems like off like this era. Felicity is a fantastic song, and it's one of these where there's just so much youthful like energy, like and like excitement to it, that it's very like irresistible album. So Orange Juice at number 5. Okay, now number 4 we have got Elvis Costello and the Attractions with Imperial Bedroom. So this is a record that if you have been watching my channel for maybe quite a few years, you might remember my review of this, which wasn't too glowing. I think I might have scored kind of mid-70 sort of percent kind of thing, which considering most albums that I really love, like, are tending to score 85 sort of plus percent, Like, it's one of these, like, if I was gonna reappraise this album now, certainly a lot of my scores would be completely different, because it really has grown on me a lot. And I think, this was Costello's kind of real leap into becoming this kind of genre hopping kind of elder statesman kind of thing. You've got Jeff Emmerich producing, of course, the famous Beatles engineer, so he really gives this album a very luxurious and very kind of lush sort of feel to it. Some of my favourite Costello songs I got on here, things like Tears Before Bedtime, Man Out of Time, and In Every Home, and The Loved Ones, I think are all great, and there's really not a bad track among them like on here. Like even songs which I would have said previously that I wasn't a fan of, things like maybe Almost Blue, Kids About It, Boy With a Problem, I would now say I actually really, really love. So it is a great record here by Elvis Costello, Imperial Bedroom at number 4. Okay, now at number 2, you might say I've got this one a bit too high. I am biased towards this artist generally, Paul McCartney, Tug of War, but this is generally thought of as one of McCartney's best albums, I think, and rightfully so, because this was a big kind of comeback album for McCartney, certainly critically, like if not like commercially, like after albums that had been slightly like not too like sort of like well critically like received. You've got, for me, some of his very best solo tracks on here, so things like the title track, Wanderlust, The Pound Is Sinking, Ballroom Dancing, like, it's like a lot of great fun, like, as well. Alongside, some big hits, things like Ebony and Ivory, which I don't really have much of an issue with that song. Again, it's not what I'd listen to every day, but when it's on, I don't skip it. I mean, like, I don't mind it. And then you've got Take It Away, again, another really, really, really great song. There's maybe a couple of lesser ones. I'd say maybe What's That You're Doing, I'm not crazy about. Does Outstay Its Welcome a little bit, but I think the good stuff on here more than makes up for those one or two kind of, slightly patchy moments. So, Tug of War at number 3. Okay, now at number 2, we have got a great Australian band, The Church, and The Blurred Crusade at number 2. So this is my favourite album by The Church, and they are a hugely prolific band. They've got so many albums, but this is the one I keep coming back to. It was their second album, and it's just such a great guitar record, if someone like you loves guitar music, so many great tones on here. You've got that kind of teamed with some kind of keyboard like atmospherics, like where like appropriate, and just this just a great interplay between all like the kinds of like the musicians when they really come together, like all like the more spacious tracks, so things like You Took and An Interlude, and think of Fire Burns as well. Like those songs where they're kind of 5 to 6 minutes, and they're just playing really, 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 really well. And then you've got more kind of straight ahead kind of poppy moments, things like Almost With You, When You Were Mine, and things like Just For You as well, like as like kind of like more of like a kind of jangle pop sort of thing. So yeah, it's a great record. I'd say it's ahead of its time. Really, really, I hear a lot of bands like the House of Love, Kitchens of Distinction, those great kind of shoegaze bands like on here almost, but kind of shoegaze bands who were still had songs like the core of them. This is a great album full of great songs, great sounds, great production. So yeah, The Church at number 2. Okay, but now at number 1 for me, this was again a slightly difficult one, because it's English Gentleman by XTC, which is a mammoth double album for them. And again, it's a record where I can't say I love every song, but I think just the highlights on it, and just I think just the kind of like the vibe of this album is just what makes it for me my favourite of the year. I mean, the highlights on here are arguably XTC's best material, things like Senses Working Overtime, No Thugs in Our House, All of a Sudden, Jason and the Argonauts. There's so many great tracks. I'd say really, there's only one or two that I'm not keen on, things like Melt the Guns. And to be honest, that's probably it. I mean, like all the other tracks, I actually do really, really, really like. It's got this great sweet spot for XTC, combining the kind of punchiness and immediacy and the abrasiveness, I guess you could say, of their earlier work. So things like Black Sea and Drums and Wires. Along with this kind of, the sophistication that they would go on to pioneer on albums like Mama and Skylocking. It's just that great transitional album for them. And yeah, it is certainly one of my favourite XTC albums, but for me, for this year, it comes out as my favourite of 1982. Okay, so that's come to the end of this video, ranking all of my favourite albums from 1982. I hope you have enjoyed. I guess if there's any sort of albums that I've not shown, it's simply because I don't own them. So if you want to leave any recommendations, please do feel free. And I also hope that I've not upset too many people with some of my picks, particularly towards the lower half of the list. But no, be interested to hear what some of your favourites are of the year. And yep, I'll see you all next time for the next video. Goodbye.